I'm very excited to come back with the team from theVERSEverse. We're going to talk about poetry and NFTs and so many things that you and your team are cultivating with this amazing community. So I have with me Anna and Sasha and Kalen. The three of you joined me and Giselle last week, and so it's nice to be back. I wanted to have more time to talk with you about what you and your community are doing. I felt like it was too rushed with the five of us for that short period of time. So I want to have time for us to breathe. Can we start talking about the visionary NFT collectors that are collecting poetry and being the forerunner and creating this new opportunity for poets and everybody involved? Can we just talk about them for a moment? So Anna, I'm not sure if you'd like to jump in and start off this fireside chat of sorts that we're having today.
Ian, first of all, thank you and the team at NFT.NYC for all these opportunities that we've been granted. As you know, we launched at NFT.NYC last year, so it really feels like home base for us. And we're grateful for the platform. This is an exciting time for poetry. The ability to transact poetry via the blockchain is going to create a generation of poetry collectors, is creating a generation of poetry collectors. The first of its kind. Of course, people have collected poetry as books, right? Or perhaps as scrolls or manuscripts, but never as digital assets. And I think that those who see the potential and the real transformative power of granting poetry this transactability and infusing it with a new commercial and cultural value as well, will be considered visionary. Those who are early, those who collect this first sort of group of poems that are being created and minted on the blockchain are holding something very valuable. And we're really honored to have been supported by such visionaries from the get-go. People like Kevin Abosh has been a wonderful, wonderful patron of our gallery. He's a poet, of course, himself, so he sees the value. But there's others who aren't poets, like Fanny Lukubai. She's an incredible patron of our gallery. We have another, big name in the space, Mentalist, is a wonderful collector of poetry and a visionary supporter of the community. And we're grateful to have people like this on our team. But of course, we're hoping that via platforms such as NFT.NYC, we can expand this collector base and have people who perhaps are avid collectors of art or other assets on the blockchain really see the value and the revolution, right? We talk about revolution, that the revolution will be tokenized. Well, the poetry revolution definitely will be tokenized. So we're really hoping that we're able to communicate and connect with new audiences who speak a digital language, who love poetry, who want poetry, and now have a real tangible way of supporting it.
Very articulate. Thank you for sharing, but please jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to jump off that point because it's so you stated, and we're so excited about it. One of the things that I think we're most excited about is the fact that this is a very new, nascent sort of genre of poetry. There are all these new forms of poetry that are being enabled and that are really coming into their own because of what's happened with NFTs and the blockchain. And I think what's really just such a great opportunity is the fact that collectors can come in and actually, empower poets who've never really had this opportunity before to really sink their teeth into their art and really look at ways to push their craft and push the bounds of what they're doing. And, by supporting poets the way that they've been able to support artists in the past, you really are unlocking new realms of poetic creativity that have never existed before. And I think that's an incredible thought that, what we're seeing right now, is in and of itself, enthralling, but we're right at the beginning. And especially when it comes to what's possible with technologies for publishing and for distributing, in addition to technologies to actually, support crypto native poetry, I think there's a lot of opportunity again to quote unquote invest in and fund and empower radically new formats. And again, that's something that's it becomes viable because there's a commercial element here. So I think that part of it is really of interest to a lot of us in the community. And another reason why we really just are so grateful for the early poetry collectors who've come on board and who've been so generous and so kind in supporting us, and why we just feel so adamant about going out and talking about the future of poetry as much as we can, because we really do see it as being quite game-changing for writers. All of us as writers, speak from a lot of experience, and this is something that we're all, we're really getting to experience firsthand. Just how many possibilities there are opening up in front of us.
Kalen, do you want to jump in and share some of your thoughts on this topic?
I think it's really interesting with NFTs in general, how much how important collectors are and how much they've become part of the story of NFTs and the history of artistic creation, and really enabling that. And I think that applies just as much to the poetry world. And I think we're going to see collectors who buy early poetry NFTs, for example, really make up part of that poetic NFT history, not just of particular NFTs, but of like the poetry movement in general. So yeah, poetry collector as a visionary kind of new kind of collector. And it's also exciting for me that they're actually really supporting poets individually. And I think there's a connection as well when there's an individual collector who knows that they're able to support a poet who, we all know poets don't make much money. So I think, I think it's really important for collectors to understand that they're actually helping poets earn money and gain a livelihood in an art form that traditionally, doesn't make a lot of money for poets. So yeah, I think it's a big, like a sea change.
On the thought of collectors, sometimes I wonder how publishers could become some of the leading collectors of poetry NFTs. You think of the Random Houses and, the Penguin Books and, the HarperCollins of the world. And so these are huge publishers, and they have these really slow systems with lots and lots of middlemen between them and a poet. And how might smart contracts with NFT poetry with great utility, like exclusive commercial rights or non-exclusive commercial rights, empower some of these ancient publishers to jump in and come alongside the other poetry collectors and kind of build out this new approach to empowering poets to keep doing what they do great and to make a living from it and to have a legacy from it beyond just the written word or whatnot. What are your thoughts on that, on big players coming in and being a part of this visionary collector group?
I would welcome it. The door is wide open. We hope that they come, but so far I haven't seen that happen. I know Sasha has a book out, and I have a book coming out in November. And we're both thinking of ways in which to marry our presence on the blockchain and our presence on the page. And I think that there's so much to be done that's really exciting. I can reinvent and reimagine traditional publishing. And I say this personally, is I don't really feel like there's much of an interest at this point. Right now, the interest is in getting the book out and, pitching it to book fairs. And it's more on me as an artist to really imagine how this book is going to live digitally, which is okay. But I think, I'm sure Sasha will agree, it would be nice to have support and infrastructure in place. But then that's the opportunity, right? And that's the freedom as well.
Yeah. I think that's so true. That's what I've been thinking a lot about as well. I mean, there is a huge opportunity here for publishers, and that's actually one of the missions, one of the things that we talked about a lot at the beginning of theVERSEverse. I mean, we kind of spoke about building a bridge between the traditional literary community, including editors and publishers and writers and literary journals, and publishing conferences and all the things that we know from having been in those circles, building a bridge between that world and what's happening on the blockchain. Because at least in our experience, and having talked to a lot of other writers and text-based artists in crypto, there is not a lot of connectivity happening right now between these two worlds. And as Anna was saying, I think there's potentially some, there's maybe interest on the side of the publishers, but there's not a lot of hands-on knowledge. There aren't a lot of writers in their lists who are actively looking to create an NFT. So I think right now it's really good to maybe be opening up channels of dialogue between these different communities. So for example, one of the things we're planning to do next year is take theVERSEverse to AWP, which is kind of the big publishing conference, the magazine conference that all the lit journals and editors and folks head to every year, and to make sure that we bring NFTs, that we bring literary NFTs to a venue like that, I think is really important. Again, just to show people just the basics, and then if anyone's interested, kind of help dig a little bit deeper. But I think there's not a lot of that happening right now. And another example of that, I was telling Anna and Kalen the other day, I actually virtually gave a talk at the Electronic Literature Organization conference on Monday. And this is a conference, multiple day conference that's dedicated to computational literature and involves, machinic imagination in lots of different ways. And so you'd think, well, there must be a lot going on with NFTs and the blockchain in that community. And there isn't, but there's a lot of interest. It just kind of stops there right now because there's not a lot of bridge building, I think, going on. So we're really focused on that. And look, I know for myself with my publisher, Black Spring Press Group, who just helped bring out my book, they're very interested. They just, I think they're really open-minded about it. I think there's lots of small publishers that are feeling the same way. They see opportunity here to actually build a really viable business model. Indie publishing is also a very difficult, place to be. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to look at smart contracts and to look at, activating communities in crypto as a way to really build a more robust future for those kinds of publishing houses, as well as looking at the opportunities for some of the, the big ones, the big companies in that arena. And I think the last thing I would say is that, again, like Anna mentioned, I think many of us who have had physical books out or who are preparing physical books for publication are really interested in ways that we can actually cultivate hybrid experiences, hybrid publishing experiences, which, I think creatively, it's such an inspiring thing to think about. It's also logistically an interesting thing to think about. I had my book come out at a time when, the supply chain was being slammed. There was a moment when basically every single book launch scheduled in the US was getting pushed back because of supply chain issues. Yeah. And so it's funny to kind of look at how easy things are to transact and to send around the world on the blockchain, and then looking at, the problems, the challenges of lugging these really heavy cartons of books around the world. I think there's a lot of opportunity from that standpoint too, to think about how we can really tap into some exciting new models for distribution, and to do that in a way that is still really giving people the same sort of excitement about holding an object. If you can have that same sort of feeling when you're encountering an NFT book, as you might when you're receiving a signed copy from an author in a bookstore or something like that. I think that's kind of the missing piece in my mind, is how do you marry all of those experiences for lifelong book lovers like us. How do you make an NFT book really appetizing and really just as covetable? So again, this is where I think we're just having a lot of conversations with people who are in possession of tools to build these kinds of things that don't currently exist, or that are in very, very early, very, very early stages right now. And to sort of be vocal about the kinds of things that we as authors would love to be able to do and how we would like to experiment. And then to involve publishers, involve, printing houses, figure out how we can all join forces to really imagine new methods for publishing and sharing literature.
I really strongly feel like there's solutions, and that this can definitely be figured out to where everybody wins, and doors that seem really closed right now can swing wide open, just with a different approach or different ways of making it all work. Kalen, were you going to jump in and say something?
Yeah, no, I agree with what you were saying. I'm really interested personally, as an artist, like an individual artist, experimenting with crypto and NFTs and what they enable, with smart contracts, as you mentioned. Like, how can smart contracts and NFTs change literature, the role of readers, the role of writers? How can it change the act of writing itself? What it means to read, because readers can also become writers, and writers collaborate with AI, and there's all sorts of really exciting things that could happen, I think, out of this, in this milieu. And but I'm also interested, like Sasha was saying, in bridging the digital books, because I'm I'm a crypto writer, I call myself, but I love books. Like, I love physical books. I like the smell of them. I've always loved touching them and reading them. And, it's my preferred way of reading always. So, bridging that world with the crypto NFT digital world. And I think there's a lot of possibilities that are really thrilling. But to come back to like the smart contract, what you were talking about with publishers, I think it's really interesting what the smart contracts can do in literature. I mean, you can obviously have secondary sales where, today you buy a book of poetry, you sell it to a bookstore, and, the poet doesn't see that money. Whereas now with NFTs, the poet is always going to be, we'll see the secondary sales from the poems, but also like incorporating like the publishers, the editors, the poets, the writers into the smart contract so that everybody gets paid out automatically, can also gain secondary sales as well. So I think smart contracts are, revolutionary. If the crypto literature really took off, like it could be really revolutionary, obviously. And I wonder also, like, maybe Anna and Sasha have more thoughts on this, but like you were talking about the role of publishers as collectors. So I was wondering, like, what would the role of publishers, if they, became interested in the crypto world, like what would their roles be? Would they be collectors? Would they be like curators where they would, bring together poets that they thought were great? Would they be someone who kind of coordinated everything and brought the editor and the poets together? Because, in the crypto world today, like in the literature world, the crypto literature world, there aren't that many editors. It's kind of like a free-for-all. So, I mean, personally, I would love to have an editor and to be able to like incorporate that editor into the smart contract. And, I would love that, but you don't see that so much at the moment. So I think that's definitely a lot of things, interesting things that could happen in that field in the future.
Maybe there's sorry, go ahead.
It's okay, go ahead.
No, that maybe there's a new name that we need to invent for that role, like a literary curator, where they're helping you curate not only the text, but the manifestation of it as an art form on the blockchain, and how that connects and bridges over with the literal world, with the book.
Yes, I think we all could use that. I want to talk about that more in a second. But I was just going to say, to Kalen's point, it's funny because they're actually, the way that books are sold and, well, they're actually, it's called an acquisition, right? Like publishing houses make acquisitions, and they have agents that are facilitating this, and they actually go to auction. So book manuscripts are sold at auction right now, and highest bid wins. And that's, in the traditional world. So it's actually not that far removed to think about, what could happen on the blockchain, where again, it's like, we can use this decentralized system to bring more people into to the table. I think right now what's really hard in the mainstream publishing world is that there's a lot of sameness. There's a lot of, there's a lot of publishers and editors who see what's selling, and they're going after the same sorts of voices and the same sorts of narratives, and because they're tested and they need to make money for their companies. And again, like one of the great possibilities that the blockchain opens up is that we can, break down some of those barriers to entry and but empower people to come in who are bringing in, points of views and perspectives that might not otherwise get to an editor's desk, or, let alone make it to the shelves of Barnes and Noble or something like that. So I think, again, there is this really interesting possibility to link together some of the ways that business model has worked. And again, like, it seems interesting that it really is set up as that kind of model of acquisitions and sales to begin with, but linking that together with what decentralization can do, I think is really tantalizing. And then to just echo Anna, like, for anyone who's listening to this who wants to, become a literary curator or whatever phrase we end up using, it has been really exciting, but also incredibly difficult trying to brainstorm, what is the ideal form for in my example, to take my book and translate it into an NFT. There's just so many options to do that in terms of platforms, in terms of different blockchains, in terms of different technologies to use. There's so many decisions to make, not even marketing considerations, but just there's so many creative and technological decisions. And it's a really exciting but very complicated thing to grapple with. And because it is such new territory, I also, I've been trying to like knock on every door and just like have conversations with folks who are at all interested in creating Web3 publishing platforms, because I don't even know that I've imagined for myself fully yet what the ideal format for a future poetry collection might be for some of my work, which tends to run the gamut from, MP4s and all that to, you name it, like analog and JPEG and whatever, but trying to figure out how to pull it together is definitely a thorny question. So again, I think more collaborative conversations about this and just kind of looking to see what people are inventing. And again, that's what the VERSEverse has really been all about since the beginning, is just making a place for experimentation and for conversation and for brainstorming, so that these new ideas can hopefully come to life, and creating connections between the people that can make it happen.
Well, maybe we could talk more about the VERSEverse. And, you have 3 parts of the gallery. Maybe we could start there so people can understand what it is that this community is doing and the expressions that are currently in place.
Do you want to tackle that, Kalen?
Sure. Yeah, so there are 3 sections in the gallery. One of the sections is a pairing between poets from the quote unquote traditional publishing world and a crypto artist who creates the visuals, who reads the poems and creates the visuals for it. And then there is the crypto conceptual section, which is, text-based art, conceptual writing, sort of experimental type of poetry. And this section, oftentimes the poet is also the artist. And then we also have the Gentex section, which is a multiple edition NFT in which a poet experiments with AI, and a visual artist creates the visual artwork for the poems.
And are all 3 of these sections of the gallery, are they equally developed out? Is there one that that the community has more emphasis on than another at the current moment, and how will things change over time?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think it's a delicious question.
Yay.
Yay. I think they will evolve over time, but time will tell. I think everything feels really fresh still, vis-a-vis what we're doing. We're onboarding poets who have no experience with the blockchain, seeing their poems brought to life. Really excited by it, really excited about learning about the metaverse. None of them, many of them had no idea what the metaverse is, which is of course a term that we're all still defining. Right. So I think that poetry on the blockchain is something that we'll be defining together, and that's something exciting that it's going to be defined as a community and expanded. And I'm sure the gallery will respond accordingly to different manifestations. I mean, there's people doing really interesting work off the blockchain in real life that we definitely want to engage with and interact with, to see how their work might connect to it potentially or not, but at least be in dialogue and open those channels of communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to watch how everything develops, but it's really wonderful to also look backwards. And I think we've been doing that too, just to kind of situate what we're doing in the history, the really rich history of visual poetry and concrete poetry and computational poetry. And, there are really a lot of brilliant poets who've done incredible work that has flown a little bit under the radar. Especially when it comes to what we think of as poetry in a more mainstream sense. And I'm really excited about, both, creating this community, this platform where younger and crypto native poets can really play with things that are brand new, but also, folks that have been experimenting in different ways for a long time, who've been bringing up a lot of the conceptual questions that we're tackling now. Like having them be part of the conversation too, I think is so valuable for so many reasons. And just again, figuring out how we can kind of, bring this historical context to what we're doing is at the same time as we're really looking forward to the future of poetry, the future of publishing, I think is just a really tantalizing prospect all around.
I want to ask, please go ahead.
Sorry. No, I think something else that we're also kind of exploring and interested in general is just how do we think about poetry or define poetry on the blockchain as NFTs digitally? I think we're kind of like blasting open this like notion of traditional poetry or what poetry is. And I think that's an interesting conversation that we can have, like what is poetry? What is it? If what is a poem as an NFT? Like it could, the technology can change what poetry is as well, I think. So I think that's an interesting direction that the gallery might take in the future. I don't know. Yeah, just exploring what poetry can be on the blockchain, the intersection of technology and poetry and writing, and yeah, the relationship between collector and poet and artist. All of these things are really interesting to explore, I think. So I would love to, to see, more work kind of digging into that.
There are two areas in particular that I'm like personally really excited about, and that I also think there's a really good precedent for when you look at what's happening in crypto art. So one area is the generative text project that we're all really excited about, and kind of thinking about what generative art in the crypto space has done for the conception of what art is and what creativity means, just bringing up these really big questions about human imagination, through these algorithmic patterns and abstractions and these beautiful images that are all, rooted in code. I think that has been really astonishing to watch. And it's been really, again, enthralling just to kind of be part of the conversation there. But I think there's something similar happening when writers are using generative text tools that are powered by code and artificial intelligence. And that is an area that I think, to what Kalen was just saying, is really kind of pushing open the doors of what we think language is and what we think writing is, in some really profound ways that really get back down to the fundamental question of like what it is that makes us human, what it is that inspires us and that fires up our imagination. So I'm really just interested to see what happens with generative text. And again, having witnessed just the incredible brilliance and imagination and creativity coming out of the generative art scene, I think that, that's something where, again, collectors have become very savvy about generative art. I'm hoping that collectors are, interested in learning more about generative text because there are a lot of parallels there. And then, another area that's kind of related, but is certainly distinct, is this idea of using artificial intelligence to translate words into images, which is becoming a very hot area right now, this idea of text to image, and using tools that enable that. It's, tools like DALL-E 2 and Midjourney and other no-code tools that I'm sure a lot of the audience has had a chance to play with. But again, it's made me think a lot about the evolution of language and the relationship between language and image, which is really at the heart of everything that we have built the VERSEverse around, is the relationship between this written language and then its aesthetic representation. So I think both of those two areas are incredibly exciting, both intellectually and conceptually, and from a literary standpoint, but also just in terms of what's happened in the trajectory of crypto art and what might be possible for crypto poetry. I think those are two really key areas to maybe keep an eye on. And it's just a fascinating zone, I think, to play in.
I agree. Anna, you want to jump in?
I'm really excited about what will happen when more traditional poets discover the blockchain. There's such beautiful poetry out there, and I say it with personal experience. The way I started sort of on social media was just sharing pictures of books that I was reading, and people were like, oh, I've never read something like this. Like, this is different from what I was taught in school, and it's just what I like to read. They're poems that are just very contemporaneous. Last night I was reading a book by Dorothy Chan, who writes about food, and they're just really humorous books about her family and the intersection of her family and food. And I think that it's going to be exciting to see people engage with poetry and rediscover it, because I think that that's happened to many of the artists with whom we work. They were, didn't really understand poetry, had no relationship with it. And then when they were paired with these poets that we've curated, they're like, oh, this hits different. This is something else. And they could relate to it and they want more. And so I think that that's a service that I really hope to continue to share via the VERSEverse and, via our own individual practices and just sharing what we're reading with the world.
Well, this has been such a fun conversation. I'm going to ask you a last question. I'd like all three of you to answer it individually. We have all these Times Square billboards that are being rented for 4 days for everybody's NFTs. If the three of you could give a message to everybody, and it was seen on the screen, the reason why I would like all three of you to answer, because I'd like you to speak to different audiences. So, Anna, if you could give a message to everybody at NFT.NYC that's a poet, what might that be? And Sasha, if you could give it to everybody that's a technologist, what might that be? And Kalen, if you could speak to the communities, what might you say? Because these are three very different groups of people that are involved in the VERSEverse and all the things that are happening with poetry and NFTs and all that will come. So if you could give a statement to these groups, please share that with us now. Anna, you want to share first?
For me, it's just very simple. It's poem equals work of art.
Sasha, what would you say to technologists?
I just want to preface this also by saying that it's so funny to me still that I come from this very traditional literary background, and I can't believe that I'm like working with AI and speaking to technologists. It's so surreal. But I think I would say that poetry is a technology, and therefore the two things are really related to one another. And I would go one step further for the crypto crowd at NFT.NYC. And I would say that poetry is actually the original blockchain. And I've said that before, and it's a hypothesis I've been like digging into a lot with my work. And what I mean by that is that poetry is something that humans invented many, 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 many years ago as a technology, as a data storage solution to basically preserve our most valuable information and make sure that it's kept safe and that it's transmitted across, generation to generation. And I think when I've had the opportunity to talk to tech audiences a little bit about poetry from that lens, it seems that sometimes something clicks a little bit. And, poetry does not seem so far removed from technology when you look at it that way. So I would probably want to put that somewhere on a billboard, that poetry is the original blockchain.
Well, Kalen, the pressure's on. Those are two brilliant answers. So what would you say, Kalen, to the communities out there, speaking to them?
Well, I guess as speaking to communities, and also from my personal practice and stance, I don't consider myself, I've never really considered myself a poet. Ironically, I hate to say this, sitting here on this panel, but I guess I would pose a question if I could. I would just say, what is poetry? I think it would be for the reason that I would like people to think about what they think that poetry is. What is poetry? Who makes up this definition of poetry? And, we can redefine poetry in our own way, I guess, to a certain extent. And as a kind of more of a conceptual writer, one of our artists, poets, Christian Book, who's in the gallery, he always says that in the conceptualist movement, they were always interested in works of literature that everyone else said wasn't literature. So when people say this isn't writing, this isn't literature, conceptualists would be interested in those kinds of writing. So yeah, I would ask the question, what is poetry? I guess, yeah.
Well, there must be an artist that sees this conversation. Artist, I'm talking to you right now. Maybe you're part of the VERSEverse community. You know what I'd love to see? I want to see Times Square, and I want it to say right in the middle, what is poetry? And on these screens, I want to say poetry is art. And on these screens, I want to say poetry is the first blockchain, and bring this to life visually. Thank you for joining me for this conversation, for sharing those last thoughts. I just really wanted more people in the NFT.NYC community to understand how diverse the projects, the approaches, the technology uses, the purposes, the heart, the vision, how diverse this really is in this industry and how early it is. And I just love that we started today with the thought around NFT collectors that collect poetry are visionaries and are forerunners and are leading this movement that empowers the type of artists that for millennia our ancestors have been impacted by, and rightfully so, and still we're impacted by today. Thank you so much to the three of you for jumping in and joining me for a longer conversation. And I look forward to seeing all of you and your community in Times Square just a few weeks from now. Have a wonderful day.